Hello everyone, Mege here. So I know I'm a little late, but I still wanted to talk about the input delay for our blog post from around a week ago, I believe, since the patch is actually hitting us tomorrow. In this blog post, the devs explained to us in detail what all the stuff behind timesnap, the reasoning behind timesnap, input delay, lag compensation is about. I think it's a very interesting read up. I'm going to leave a link to it in the description below, so you can check it yourself if you want. So without wasting too much time, let's get to it. And the first thing they state is that for the timing of the attacks, they're using the baseline of 30 FPS. This is to have a common ground between all platforms, even though 30 FPS are obviously not common on PC. I believe almost no one plays 30 FPS on PC. 60 and higher are much more common. Myself, I play around 90. So before diving into timesnap itself, they're explaining to us why they thought of timesnap to begin with, the timesnap genesis, how they call it. They're providing us with a couple videos which are gonna show, I'm gonna have to open them in different tabs because otherwise they don't play for some reason. So before playing them, the first video is going to show us, there's no timesnap, nothing in here. It's going to show us a top light from the warden, and the defending warden is gonna move his guard from the right to top at the last moment, very last moment, to block the attack. And we're gonna see he actually manages to, you see, it's very late, actually the animation is kind of already, you know, here. But of course in movement you don't really notice this, and the attack is actually successfully blocked. At the same time we're gonna see here pretty much the same movements, top light, the warden is gonna try and block at the very last moment with a top guard stand switch. And we see, even though it's basically looking very similar here, I'm gonna try and play them very quickly one after the other. You see, this one here and this one here, they look very similar timing wise. However, one of the two actually connects and the other gets blocked. So basically the developers didn't want something with such a little timing difference. We're talking about 33 milliseconds difference here between a successful and unsuccessful block. Because of this, and because they want the game to be as much clearer and readable as possible, they decided that actions such as blocking should have a 100 difference between actually successfully blocking and unsuccessfully blocking. 100 milliseconds difference. And to achieve this 100 millisecond difference between a successful and unsuccessful block, they decided to implement timesnap, which is basically a way to align player actions on 100 milliseconds intervals. I know timesnap can be a little hard to understand, but the devs thankfully provided us with a very nice and visual graphic of it, which I'm gonna try and explain. So sadly I can't really stop and play this animation, this GIF here, so I'm gonna go and I took still images of these GIFs. We're gonna first look at this, try and understand what happens, then go at the GIF. This might be a little complicated to understand, I'm gonna try and be as clear as possible. So we have the two players on a timeline here, okay? The timeline is divided into smaller 100 milliseconds intervals. You see 100, 200, 300, 400 up till a second. And these intervals themselves are divided into smaller 33 and 66 intervals, of course. So each one of these things is 33 milliseconds, and they form, of course, rounded up an 100 millisecond interval. So here we get to see how timesnap works. The first player, the attacking player, actually they're both attacking, but the orange player, player 1, inputs an attack at the 333 milliseconds interval, right here, alright? This attack, however, is delayed until the closer 100 millisecond interval, so in this case, is delayed until the 400 millisecond interval. At the same time, not really the same time, but the player 2 actually inputs an attack, as you can see, at the 66 frame interval. So as you can see, player 1 actually input attack 33 frames earlier, but due to timesnap actually delaying attacks in 100 milliseconds interval, both attacks are actually launched in game at the same time, so they're actually hitting at the same time. So why was this implemented? Of course, as it was explained earlier, they didn't want very small time frame difference to make an actual difference. They wouldn't be very clear, very readable as they said it. So in this case, while the first player actually launched this attack before the second player, the difference is so negligible in timing that it will actually feel unfair where you see both attack clashing and the opponent actually lands before yours. So let's check this in motion. I'm gonna just, as you see, idle bot here. First input, second input, both attacks get, however, delayed to the nearer, 100 milliseconds interval due to timesnap. Both attack starts, both attack play out at the same exact time. Sadly, time snap of course wasn't without these issues. Attacks will get randomly delayed of a different amount. So for example, in this case we have the first attack of the player 1 being delayed by 66 frames, milliseconds, and the second attack being delayed by 33 milliseconds. It's inconsistent. The devs are also providing a practical example to actually understand more in depth how time snap actually worked in different situations. In this example, we're gonna have a theoretical 100 milliseconds network latency, because of course you have to factor in network latency. So I'm gonna use still images again. We have an attacker and a defender here. So, the attacker and defender are idle. This should be, attacker idle here. Sure, they're both idle till here. And on the 400 milliseconds, the attacker inputs his attack. So since we are already on a 100 milliseconds interval, there is no time snap at work here at all. So what happens is that the attack play actually has no input delay, and just as soon as you press it, boom, it starts and it plays out normally. However, since we have of course network lag, so for example, say I'm gonna use a silly example here. Okay, so we have this animation. This pen actually move. Can you actually see the pen? The pen drive? Yeah, actually has to move from here to here. All right, this is the soar animation. However, when I actually input this attack, of course, since there is latency, maybe my opponent is in Germany, and the information of me actually pressing a button has to travel from Germany from Italy to Germany to my opponent machine side of things. So what happens, since I have no delay on my attack plays out like this. My opponent has 100 milliseconds delay, and the first portion of the attack, the first 100 milliseconds of the attack animation gets cut out completely. So my opponent is not gonna see this, but he's gonna see this, like this, something like this. You know, a smaller animation. We're gonna see this. So we're seeing this a lot lately, with delayed lights and stuff like that. Of course, this makes it harder for the opponent to actually react to the attack. You know, if you cut a portion of a very fast attack, say Peacekeeper Zone for example, which is already 400 milliseconds, you cut the first 100 milliseconds, it becomes 300 milliseconds, which is pretty much unreactable. So let's see this in motion. See, both attacker and defender, both idle. Attack is sent. The attack is actually starts on the 400 milliseconds because time snap doesn't play any part if it's already on the 100 milliseconds interval. However, input lag makes this portion of the attack completely cut, and of course the total attack animation for the opponent, the receiving end, is actually short. So in this other example we have a similar situation. However, this time the attacker inputs the attack on the 66 millisecond interval. So what happens here? Of course, time snap kicks in, delaying the attack to the 100 millisecond closer interval, which is the 400 milliseconds interval again. However, what time snap does in this case, it kind of buffer some of the total network lag, because the input was sent here. So even though there is no animation here, the input was sent here, and the total network lag is actually a little earlier. Of course, this might be a little hard to understand. We're gonna go for the animated version later. So what happens in this case, the total portion of attack the animations is skipped for is actually shorter. It's not 100 milliseconds, it's 66 milliseconds. So let's check the animated version for this. The attacker idle, input at the 66 interval, time snap delays this here. The animation actually starts at the 400 interval. However, the input lag factor, of course, from here to here, 100 milliseconds, input lag doesn't care for time snap. In the end, the skipped portion of the attack is actually smaller. At the same time, of course, we're not gonna go for the still version here. This is very similar, except on the 33 millisecond intervals. So let's do this here. Attacker idle. This time, the attack is input here, 33 milliseconds, delayed till here, so you have a 66 frame delay. However, this lets us see more of the animation. You see? Only a little portion of the attack is actually skipped. So the problem with all of this system is that it was basically random and unpredictable. So lastly, what the current implementation, which will actually be implemented tomorrow, and we're all gonna be very eager to test, I know I am, they kind of went with a common ground, let's say. We're gonna go for the still image again. So what actually happens here, they decided to go for a fixed input delay of 33 milliseconds, no time snap. So what this does in this case, let's see, we have an attack starting on the 400 milliseconds interval, but it doesn't really care anymore. There is no time snap, so it could have started here, 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 or wherever. So what happens here? You input the attack, you get a 33 milliseconds delay regardless of where and when you input attack, so this is consistent. Even though we might perceive a small input delay lag on inputs, of course, it's still very small, and at least it's going to be consistent. So what this does is kind of helps buffer the total network lag, as you can see, kind of like it happened in one of the examples with the previous time snap implementation. And so in this case, you have just a smaller portion of the attacks which is going to be skipped. It's still going to be there. This, as I said, this is kind of a common ground. We are very eager to test it, of course, so let's see it animated. Attacker idle, of course. Input here. 33 milliseconds delay, regardless of on offensive action, of course. I'm going to talk about this later, just offensive actions. And here we have where the input is actually received, so just this part of the animation is going to be cut. Which is it's like kind of a compromise in a way, which is not really aiming to fix the skipped animation part of attacks. What it's trying to actually fix is consistency. You know, all attacks are going to be consistent now. Of course, this is only applied on offensive input, no defensive actions. So let's see what an offensive input is. They're detailing it here in this list. Light attacker always consider offensive input. Heavy attacker consider an offensive input except when it's a parry, which is not delayed. Guard break are considered offensive and not counter guard breaks though. Stance change at the same time for light attack. So if I'm top stance, I want to stance change right and then throw a light attack are considered, if I'm reading it right, an offensive action, offensive input. Dodge and cancel feint are considered an offensive input if they're triggered with an offensive input as well. So for example, dodge attack or I don't know, cancel into guard break, whatever. And releasing guard break, light attack or heavy attack, for example, Islander's offensive stance, you have to actually release, you go in offensive stance, to actually throw an attack you release the trigger, so this is counting as an offensive action as well. So all of these changes are going live tomorrow, and I am personally, and you should as well, extensively test this out, see how it feels, how it works, and tomorrow they're coming out on PC, and 1 week later, if there is no issues, if it's working as intended, 1 week later on consoles. In the meantime, do let me know with a comment if you actually enjoyed this solution, what you think of this, what you think of this video, just in general give me your feedback, your input. I hope you enjoyed the video, you found it useful, I hope you have a good day, and I will see you all next time.